Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we're here for the fourth of a six-part series as we meander through the tale of Peer Gynt. Now, I have been told, I have been corrected, that it is not Peer Gynt, it is Peer Gynt. I apologize. Hopefully that is correct now. I, in hesitation, looked at many different pronunciations, many different places on the internet, and I went with whatever was there the most. And it seemed Peer Gynt was, from my findings, the most numerous. However, we are going to get right into it with a recap of what happened. Peer has moved to Morocco because apparently that's the next thing you do in life. And he has friends and a waistcoat. And he left his wife because, this is Peer. This is what he does. That way he could be a slave trader and a shipper of idols. Not sure where else this story could go. That seemed the next logical step. Don't know how I didn't see that coming. And that's what he's done for, say, 30-ish years. In his old age, Peer has settled down quite a bit. He has small goals and dreams, namely, to be emperor. It's the little things in life, really. And not just to be emperor, but to be emperor by the power of his gold. My voice just cracked, and I apologize for that. I am jealous at the prospect of gold, apparently. Delusions of grandeur, however, are often met by a deluge of disappointment. And Peer's yacht is stolen. Seemingly unperturbed, Peer travels to the desert where he meets a woman. But as we all know, the desert is not to be trusted, and women of mystery are not to be trusted. So, when you have the two, and you put them together, no trust should be given, but it is. That trust is granted, and slowly, everything that Peer has left is whittled away from him. As he is robbed and left in the desert. All the while, Solveig is apparently still waiting, humbly, quietly, at home for Peer to come back. She has no idea that he will return, if he will return, where he is, what he's doing, but she trusts that he will come back. But it turns out Peer isn't coming back, at least not immediately, because he's headed to Egypt. That's right, he's headed to Egypt. Because after Morocco and the desert, Egypt made sense. So going through this story, for the first time in his life, Peer is without any women at all. It is to be remembered that though he did not have a father growing up, he did have a parent, and he was with his mother. From there, he went on to living with Solveig, with whom he considered himself in love. But in the intermediary, there were affairs, namely with a troll woman that scared him because she threatened to follow him to the ends of the earth. Apparently she hasn't. That did not stop him from remembering that lesson learned. And instead of searching other women, he simply busied himself with work. Is there some type of commentary to be made here? A quote from page 58 of this, which is, I believe, the first scene of Act 4. The reason that I am unmarried, yes, gentlemen, completely clear the matter is. What should a man be? Himself, is my concise reply. He should regard himself and his. But can he, as a sumpter mule, for others, woe and others weal? So, the commentary here that there is something inherently masculine about isolation. In his isolation, as we see in this text, he thrives. He buries himself in work. Solveig, on the other hand, though she doesn't seem to be unsuccessful, or non-successful perhaps, she does not seem to be particularly happy. And as is often the case in literature, it seems that the masculine is granted worth based on his work, whereas the feminine is granted her worth based on how she takes care of others. How far back does this commentary go? It is hard to say, but it seems to be there through many patriarchal societies, and perhaps even many matriarchal societies. The differentiation does not seem to be there if you go far enough back, because with Neanderthals, through the excavation of their bones, females' bones and males' bones seem to have the same wear and tear and signs of breakage and healing across gender lines. This is to say that not only did women work, probably they also warred. That is, that they were necessary for the hunt, and they were necessary for procuring property. It's not necessarily, you don't necessarily find that as you go back through human remains. And the reason I can say that, though I am not an archaeologist, is that the existence of these markings on female Neanderthal bones is often cited, meaning that it is cited because it is lacking from our own past and history. So is this something that has turned its head through literature because it does seem so inherent to us? Why does that seem so inherent to us? Especially in today's world, I'm not sure that there is any real reason. There is not much difference in much of the work between men and women. I work retail, and there's nothing about my job that can't be done by either gender. Such is the case many places. So I'm not sure exactly if that is the commentary being made here, that in his isolation, Per thrives, though he is still gullible. Whereas Solveig seems to have, in walling herself off, limited the individual as well. Does that make sense? Because it seems that it is through his success that Per has made these friends that he has made. And through her lack of work, Solveig seems isolated completely. On page 63, we get this from Monsieur Ballon. You are Norwegian? And Per responds, yes, by birth, but cosmopolitan in spirit. For fortune such as I've enjoyed, I have to thank America. My amply furnished library I owe to Germany's later schools. From France, again, I get my waistcoats, and my manners, and my spice of wit. From England, an industrious hand, and keen sense for my own advantage. The Jew has taught me how to wait. Some taste for the dolce far niente I have received from Italy. And one time, in a perilous past, to eke the measure of my days, I had recourse to Swedish steel. And this is another assumption or exploration that is presented in this piece, and it does not seem to need explanation. It does not seem to need to be explored because it is something that seems right to us. The hero of the story, even if the hero is a bit of a half-wit, even if the hero is a bit of a jerk, it is an effortless assumption in literature that the hero picks up bits and pieces of the hero who he is to become along the way. That is a basis of literature. This is character development, but it's not just character development. It is necessary to the story feeling more natural. It is necessary to the growth of the character as the growth of the character pertains to the growth of the reader. This is the way that we, as a reader, learn through the mistakes of the hero, learn through the misfortune of the hero, learn through the good and bad deeds done of the hero. And that is such the case so fervently throughout literature that even in something that is quite possible, I think you could refer to this as an absurdist text. Even in an absurdist text, it is necessary for this. Or if you look at something like even The Stranger by Albert Camus, we start, which is often considered a nihilistic text, is often considered an absurdist text, where he shoots a man out of self-defense and is sentenced to life, but decides it doesn't really matter. Even in that text, we have to start with what has become a very famous first line, "Maman died today." So even there, we are starting with a character who is debased, a character who has come off of the platform from which he started, even if we don't ever see that previous platform. His mother dying, we all know what it means for a mother to die. Even if we don't know their relationship, we know what it means for a mother to die. And because of this, that opening scene in The Stranger, where he is sort of without feeling, he is sort of lost in and of the story itself. He questions why he feels so little. The assumption that the hero takes a journey and picks up bits of who he is going to be along the way is so deeply rooted in how we absorb literature that even in an absurdist and nihilistic text such as that, we are left at the base assumption that a mother should mean to our protagonist what a mother does mean to us. Likewise, in this text, Per has lost his mother and then sort of loses his shit, right? He's always a bit of a screw-up. He's always a bit of a loose personality. But it is not until he loses his mother that completely going off the map, as it were, and finding himself in Morocco can change his character profusely to where he becomes not so much of a screw-up, but very successful in business by being willing to do things other people are not. Other places that this happens in literature. So along those lines, you don't just pick up bits and pieces of who you are to become, of the hero that you are to assume to by staying at home. It doesn't happen that way. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, and I'm not a Star Wars guy, so maybe I'm off base. I believe Luke Skywalker is from Tatooine, a desert planet. He receives his training from the little green guy in Dagobah, I believe. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. I believe those are the planets. But he has to leave where he's from in order to become what he is to be. Other heroes, Batman, loses both parents, just as Luke Skywalker had. And it is not immediately that young Bruce Wayne leaves. Bruce Wayne leaves to assume to the position of Batman, to create the position of Batman, by leaving home, by assuming the role of a criminal, by being trained, and then returning home. Likewise, many characters have a transformative experience where they either lose parents or lose the surrogate parents that they had, and then or some other transformative experience like that, leave where they assume their own adulthood, where they assume their own individuality, and then return. So, though I have been wrong so many times when it comes to this text, trying to predict what's going to happen, I have to assume that at some point, Per is going to return home. Perhaps not home, but at least to Solvig, which was his home for a little bit. And I believe that's why we're planted with that scene of Solvig in this fourth act. Moving forward a little bit to page 73, we get this quote. This is Act 4, Scene 5. What an enormous, limitless waste. This is as he is in the desert, as Per is in the desert. What an enormous, limitless waste. Far in the distance an ostrich is striding. What can one fancy was really God's meaning in all of this voidness and deadness, this desert bereft of all sources of life, this burnt-up cinder that profits no one, this patch of the world that forever lies fallow, this corpse that never since Earth's creation has brought its maker so much as thanks. Why was it created? How spendthrift is nature. This is a reflection of Per on his own life. He is fallow. He is without child. He is without the next generation. And he's been spendthrift in his, spendthrift to the self, perhaps. He has been selfish in his fortune. He has been extravagant with himself, but he has been spendthrift to those things which might make his creator happy. Devoid of reproduction, he seeks to replace it with fortune. He seeks to replace success with fortune as opposed to family. This is seemingly him coming to the revelation that his life has been bereft. His life has been devoid. That without those fruits of a more natural thing, his life will be easily forgotten. But he does not seem to let this really sink in. He seems to still be after riches and fortune and wealth and his position as emperor from wherever he got that idea. It is not perhaps in this act at all that we see him renege on those thoughts, on those feelings, on that urge and desire. Which is, in the role of literature, the role of literature is for the reader to learn about his or herself, not to learn about the protagonist. Learning about the protagonist, as opposed to his or herself, is one of the sort of vaguely defining lines between literary fiction and genre fiction, if you really think about it. Because literary fiction, something like William Faulkner, say, the real world is presented more or less as it is, regardless of your status in life. Versus, meaning that they are viewpoints of the world that you live in which are to be learned from that text. Versus, for example, science fiction, in which one of the main things you can learn is about this protagonist's world and the things he or she does therein. Or fantasy, where you are learning much the same about the world and secondarily the character, because it is almost impossible to put yourself in those positions. Many of the positions presented. Either that or you have to take some great metaphorical leap. For what that is worth, I'm not sure. For how much imagination a story should take in order to become genre fiction versus literary fiction, I'm not sure the dose. But it is an interesting thing to see upheld. On 78, which is, as it becomes, scene 7, still southward clove by my keel, the salt sea currents through, where palms were swaying proud and fair. A garland, round the ocean bright, I set my ship afire. This is an interesting image because there is a very old lesson from history that is often told, and it has become an adage and a cliche: if you want to take the island, you burn the boats. I believe that's from Cortez. Cortez was causing all sorts of hell and was wrecking and pillaging and running his men ragged in the process. I believe this is Cortez. Correct me if I'm wrong here. But his men were on the verge of revolting. So he took an island, and in the middle of the night, they were facing great resistance. Their supply was low, their rations were low, and their morale was incredibly low. The men's morale was incredibly low, and they were going to revolt against Cortez. And in the middle of the night, he sent one of his closest captains, generals, I don't know, to burn the boats. And upon burning the boats, the men knew they had nowhere left to go. There was no retreat. Even if they overran Captain Sweet Captain, they had nowhere to go. So they had to assume the roles again of conqueror and fight their way forward because there was no backwards. If you want to take the island, you burn the boats. This is interesting to see pop up, this same type of imagery. It is interesting to see that pop up in this context as Per is journeying to become an emperor. Per wants to be an emperor, and what better place to go than Egypt, if it is an emperor that you aspire to be, if it is greatness to which you aspire. Egypt built the modern Western world. Egypt was a great civilization before such things were really around. Egypt was the first, depending on who you listen to and how far back you think human history goes, was the first great civilization, the first capstone in human history. But it's also where it becomes apparent that power, and even monuments built to the self, like the Sphinx, all of these things crumble in the sands of time. So what is it to be learned from going to Egypt? Perhaps to realize that such greatness is possible. It is possible and it can be done. But it lasts not much longer than do you. On a bit of a reader's response criticism, this act really slowed this story down for me. I'd be interested to hear how you felt about this act in the comments section, because it's one that did not do well for me. It wore me out to get to the end of this one. But that is all I have for this part of the read-along, part 4 of a 6-part read-along. 1 part for each of the acts, and then a review of the text in general. If you like this sort of thing, help me out by hitting that like button. It helps me grow on the channel. Hit subscribe if you were here but you have not already subscribed. And if you want to help me grow further on this channel, there is a link to our Patreon to be found in the description below. And I hope to have you back for the next part of this read-along.